And so to give you an idea, I'm hoping that tonight we'll get a chance to dive into team dynamics, which is another way of talking about teamwork, team building. So we'll do that, and then my hope is maybe after about 15 minutes ish of providing some content to you all, that we'll be able to break away and talk about some team building ideas and some things maybe that we're currently using or we have used that we think are effective. Rahul and I are going to be talking about one of the ones that he and I both trained, I should say, but I included a picture from one of the activities that we did, so we can give you guys an idea that at least you can walk away with, if not doing the same activity, at least having an idea how something like that might look and kind of the characteristics of that. So without further ado, I will throw up this presentation here. I will say again, if you need something, if you have a comment or something, just shoot it in the chat. I'll see the alert pop up and I'll come back to it. As usual, I'll break into certain places where we can have a discussion, but we'll keep moving. So talking about team dynamics, what I want to do is talk to you just briefly about the Spanish Supercopa final, or the Super Cup final. It just recently took place, and here's a couple tidbits from it. You had Barcelona playing Athletic Bilbao. It was tied at the end of regulation 2-2, and Bilbao went on and won in extra time 3-2. And the interesting thing is, to my knowledge, this was the first time that Lionel Messi, who is arguably the best player in the world at the moment, or even of all time for soccer, was sent off in the 120th minute for violent conduct. Now I'm going to break here and just go back to our chat here. And what I want you to think about is when you hear that stuff and you think about it, and you think about teams, any ideas that might come up as to how the team might look, how it might kind of appear if you were to be watching this. So team lost in extra time, Messi sent off. Those are maybe two things that you might start thinking like, this doesn't sound real like the player, like he has never gotten a red card before. So this is a game where Lionel Messi, best player in the world, got sent off. And the team, Barcelona, who's one of the best in the world, ended up losing. Any thoughts before I go any further?
What are you asking us, really, John? Just like
when you hear those things, anything come up about how the team might look, how the team might, have performed, anything like that? Because of course it is a team sport. So, these are all outcomes, or these are things that are a result of what happened in the game. So it's just stats, but I'm just wondering if you hear these things, if anything would come to mind when you talk about this idea of team dynamics and team building and things like that.
I think of just from being able to watch the Bulls when Michael Jordan was there, and some other teams where I think there are superstars or enormous talents who are great players and can elevate their game on a team, but aren't necessarily great leaders, aren't necessarily leaders in many aspects. They're only leaders by certain actions or talents.
Okay.
And no disrespect to Messi, I just don't think he's a leader. I don't think he's a leader of men. I think he leads himself. And I'm not saying he's a selfish person. I just don't think he operates in a dynamic where his team isn't as strong around him, where he has to take up the mantle of helping others or serving others in that environment. And when it becomes frustrating because he can't do that, then you probably see the result.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you. Sean, I see you say uncharted territory for Barca, maybe, so some shock. Sure. Okay. We'll pause right there, and I'm going to throw up a picture of what it looked like at the end of regulation going into overtime. So over here is Barcelona waiting for the game to restart. And this is how they broke out after the game ended in regulation. This is how they spent their interval time in between the end of regulation and the start of extra time. So this is what they look like over here. And then look over here at Athletic Bilbao.
Hey, John, I can't see what you're showing, and I don't know why.
Yeah, you might to share
Oh,
screen
I not
first.
share the screen. I'm sorry. I'm
What's
sorry.
that? Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what I
I
did.
thought maybe it's because I'm on an iPad.
No, it's me being
All
a
right.
dummy here. I apologize.
That's all right.
So here we go. Now I can actually, that's why I couldn't see you guys before. There we go. All right. So anyways, here are the details, right? There's the stuff. Now, that's what it looked like. So when you see that stuff before, here's the details, right? Tied 2-2 at overtime or going into overtime. Athletic Bilbao wins 3-2, Messi sent off, and this is in between end of regulation and the beginning of overtime. So essentially, Barcelona did not come together to talk about anything. They didn't, well, they may have, but we don't see that here. All we see is this. We see players seemingly kind of separated and all that. And then you look over here at Athletic Bilbao. And when you see that, I'm curious what you guys think now when you hear about the result. Is it a shock to you?
Sorry, I don't mean to hog the microphone, but
Okay.
I'm gonna make an analogy here from art because
Sure.
I'm an art teacher. We talk about things like proximity and how it establishes unity. And proximity is when things are very close together and there's very little negative space,
Mm-hmm.
and it creates unity. That's kind of what I see here. There's
Okay.
no unity there. There's
Right.
too much space between. There's, um, you know, anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's a
I
good observation. I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I went two ways with it, and one was that direction, Ryan, but then the other is the respect that I have for Barcelona because the level of football that they've played for so many years.
Yeah.
Part of me looks at this and says they're ready to go. They don't need to talk about it. They know the game plan. They know the dream or the end goal.
Yeah.
Part of me wonders, did they just assume, and maybe that's the wrong way to go about it?
Right.
Were they a little bit too arrogant, maybe? But or is it just confidence in themselves of knowing, hey, we know what we need to do, so let's go, let's game on.
Sure.
Mm.
Good points, right? Like it's really hard for us to tell, but if you were to really know the backstory, perhaps about what's happening at Barcelona right now, if knew that Messi had kind of been toying with leaving, and then he kind of was kept there and as a contractual thing, and forcibly kind of told, hey, we're going to let you go, but it'd be for $600 million if someone signs you, and all this and that. You're talking about an environment where arguably their figurehead or like the people that the person that everybody looks to on the team is kind of in disarray, and it would kind of make sense that there's some dissension amongst the team and all that, but we don't know that, but the way it looks is that there's perhaps something going on there. So we're not trying to diagnose anything here. We're just making observations and just kind of touching on things that might be relevant. So we talk about team dynamics and team building. Here's an example where a team that doesn't really seem to be exhibiting any traits that to us look like or like a team or cohesion could still potentially win or do well. And here's a team that does look like, it has cohesion, that they're, united and whatnot, and they could still possibly lose. But in this case, they ended up winning. So we don't want to correlate one to the other, but we're just noticing teams in an environment and looking at how these things come across. Just want to start the conversation there. So when we talk about teams, I wanted to think about people that I thought would have a different perspective on teams. So I wanted to pull from some people that I thought really either understand the nuance behind teams and creating teams, or could really pinpoint what's really unique about teams. And so when we see that here, we look at of course, the Zen master there, Phil Jackson. If there's one guy who might know about teams, it's probably him. So talking about the strength of the team is in the individual member, but yet the strength of each member is the team. So they work together there. Essentially, if you don't have some of your individual members, the team's not going to be as strong as it's going to be. But at the same time, the strength of the team is in each individual. So those two kind of correlate to each other, at least according to his philosophy. Then you look at Carnegie, and the thing that I really liked about this is working together towards a common vision. And that's usually what you talk about when you're working with a team. You have to bring people together to achieve an objective that everybody kind of strives for together, as opposed to individual people looking to get the glory and things like that. It usually has to be, you have to make sacrifices somewhere. And then the more that I look at Pat Summit, the more I really enjoy listening to her talk and the way that she went about coaching and things like that. And so it's always interesting to see what her perspectives are. And so, teamwork is really a form of trust. And I think that really boils down to a lot of what I saw with the military and all those really tight units that were, you could always tell, and I'm sure Rahul could back me up on this, that you could always tell what units had like good team dynamics or were able to work really well together, because they just seem to trust each other. They seem to know each other really well. They seem to have good bonds and all that kind of stuff. And so when you have that, that always makes a team always run a little more smoothly. And of course, teamwork is really the form of trust. So it's what happens when you surrender the mistaken idea that you can go at it alone and realize that you won't achieve your individual goals without the support of your colleagues. So I think that's really a nice way to put it when you think about teams and how teams actually operate. So when we talk about teams and such, the question I want to throw out is, what are coaches, bosses, leaders usually referring to when they speak about athletes or their employees or whomever, and they either like each other a lot or they don't like each other? Usually there's a word that's thrown out there a lot. And when we talk about it, it's usually chemistry, right? So chemistry is another way for us to look at this. So Scott, here's your boy. They're doing a little bit of science work, but please don't drink the experiments here. So that's kind of the direction I want to go with this, is talking about chemistry and how we can be better at building this cohesion so that teams can thrive and be better to perform when it's needed, and also, of course, build social bonds, which really helps when it gets to those difficult moments. So we talk about cohesion. We're overall talking about team cohesion is this multidimensional approach to including social and task components at both individual and team levels. And then when we look at social cohesion, we're talking about the bonding for social reasons, the extent to which the team interacts and enjoy each other's company. And I'll get to the reasons why they differentiate here, and they actually do differentiate for a good reason. Task is more about the bond to do the work. So they're all kind of working towards a shared or performance related task. And so that's how sport and performance psychology looks at this idea of team chemistry, is talking about more cohesion. And so task and social cohesion are the core pieces of this idea of group dynamics and how to make groups work better. So commonly when you're looking for these terms, you can talk about team building, but usually it's more about group dynamics and then cohesion and looking at task and social cohesion. So there's just some terms for you to get familiar with in case you are looking for some more like research-based, evidence-based information or results and studies. So really, a good team is going to have a balance between, or they're going to have a good amount of social cohesion and task cohesion. It's going to balance in a certain way. And as we go along with this this discussion tonight, what I really want to focus on is which one is perhaps more important. And by more important, I mean which one is more beneficial to the team and its performance and actually achieving what it wants. Usually there's this misconception about the weight of one versus the other, but I do want to dive into them separately. But I want to take a pause here real quick and check to see if there are any questions before I get further into what we're talking about. Is there any questions so far? So we're tracking, okay, cool. So we're tracking cohesion, all that good stuff. All right, cool. Just want to make sure. All right, so we're going to jump into social cohesion first. So a lot of research is out there saying that there is some importance about social cohesion, but it is perhaps maybe not as important as task cohesion in enhancing the performance of the group. And some of the reasons why, as you can see here highlighted, is that when there's too much social cohesion, you run the risk of groupthink. You run the risk of over socialization, and therefore decision-making takes a hit. Perhaps the ability to give feedback to individuals takes a hit, because now you're suddenly worried about ruining the dynamics of the social group. Cliques form, people get cast out that are not in the group, or they get kind of cast aside as being different, things like that. So we want to be mindful of what activities we use and how those might be either reinforcing this social dynamic and its importance, or perhaps ignoring it because there is a need for some of this stuff to happen. But if we're talking about getting a group to really bond together, we can probably do that together or at the same time with task cohesion versus just focusing on social stuff. Because usually, again, coaches will say, well, the group doesn't like each other. We need to do more team building stuff. Okay, cool. So if you want to focus on the social aspect, that may not be as beneficial as the task piece. So even though we might need both of these aspects or these characteristics to be present in a team, there's a number of studies that are saying that the social factor maybe not be necessary for performance. And some of the things I see, like I said, is groupthink, which I put as negative, because if you're having a team, you probably want diversity and difference in thoughts and opinions and perspective, because if everybody's thinking the same way, it becomes an echo chamber, much like if you're working with a team outside of sport and in an office. Like, innovation doesn't really take place if there's not some sort of, dissension amongst the group, kind of giving different ideas and objecting to different ideas. So the same thing's true when you work with a team in sport. If everyone's always agreeing with who appears to be the social leader of the group, then you might be ignoring the fact that somebody on the team sees something different and they're afraid to say something and speak up to the rest of the group. So this is, again, about trying to provide a psychologically safe environment, but also an environment where there's no dominance in the social group and you're trying to eliminate those cliques. The one benefit of it, though, is that you get this enjoyment of the sport or the activity. So people will perhaps want to come back and play or want to play longer. They invest more of their time in it. So there is a rewarding piece to having a high social cohesion. But again, you have to balance that, because the risk is that you might interrupt things that could make the team productive, like feedback, or even if you're going to feed things forward and communication styles and things like that. The deteriorating performance falls in line with the whole groupthink and the idea that perhaps, cliques might actually interrupt the cohesion of being willing to pass to each other, interact with each other, trust each other. So those things can play a role. And lastly, the thing about social loafing. Social loafing is this idea that, certain members can just kind of take it easy and other people will do the work. In other words, people don't always pull their weight. And so if you're familiar with, providing a group of students in the classroom, maybe you give them, 4 students in a group and only 2 kids are doing the work, the other 2 are slacking off and they're doing whatever. That's an example of what social loafing might look like. Or perhaps if you're engaged in some sort of, team building activity and it involves, 4 or 5 people, 2 people are trying to figure it out, 3 are just kind of hanging out, talking, whatever. That's an example of social loafing. Does not necessarily always bode well for the team and the performance of the team. And other piece of that is if there is a clique involved, social loafing actually is less likely to be addressed, because there's this fear of perhaps interrupting or trying to break up that clique. And if that clique is one of those dominant groups, then the fear of saying something to that clique may in fact allow that clique to persist a little longer. So it's really important for us as coaches, as individuals that are trying to do these team building activities, to be mindful that while social cohesion is good, we have to make sure we're balancing it, because if it's too high and we're putting our players in positions where cliques can develop, we want to make sure we're not letting that happen, because that could be detrimental to our team's performance and the group. As you can tell in this article here, they're talking about insubordination and mutiny. That actually is more along the military line with like high risk environments. So very important. Ryan, I see you're unmuted. Do you want to question or comment?
Yeah, I do. I have a question. It's swimming around in my head, and it always has for a long time. It's a cultural norm for us to from a team standpoint, to elevate a person to captain, right? To have captains wearing armbands. In the military, it's obviously somebody that leads the group. And I get why that's important sometimes, but I wonder if that's something that contributes to the social loafing or contributes to some of the deterioration you're talking about because of cliques. Obviously, leadership has to be done the right way so that doesn't create a difficult situation. But what are the thoughts on, I guess, the validity of having a captain over, let's say, a leadership group or something of that nature?
Sure.
because I think it's, it's in every sport, it seems to be the social norm or the cultural norm that there has to be somebody wearing a captain's armband.
Hmm.
Well, for those of us that have been into sports and leadership and teaching for a long time, we know there are good leaders and there are bad leaders, quote unquote.
Hmm.
So I guess my question is, should we head in another direction? Are we becoming more aware of what's more effective, and is having a captain really effective?
I have a couple thoughts on that. I'm happy to share them. And I'm curious if other people would like to share theirs as well. For me personally, I feel like, um, in sports, you definitely need somebody who's going to be. I think the captain position is also the person who's supposed to interact with the officials and whatnot, so they become like the official spokesperson of the team, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that that's warranted, because you don't want 11 players coming at a referee, or in some other cases, 4 or 5 players, whatever it's going to be. Um, so I kind of take it as, if that's going to be something that's going to be perpetuated, then there needs to be quality standards of selecting them. So you need to be aware what kind of character, your players have. And so I'm a big advocate for character development, and
Yeah.
trying to identify characteristics of what I think is good character and people that would fit that position.
Right.
And I think, having coached with you and other people, I know it's not always the best player. I know it's not always the player who, is the one who always speaks the loudest, because, that's not a fair way of assessing what a person knows, and trying to make sure we're picking a person who has good qualities. It becomes convoluted at times when you're trying to say, well, this person looks like a good captain.
Yeah.
So I actually would recommend that you keep that idea, but
Yeah.
you have a good system of going through and evaluating what you think are the characteristics that really exemplify what you're looking for in your program.
So, I mean, that's my thought too. I wondered if anybody had any other insight on it. But
Yeah.
the other thing too is my belief. Now, this is just my belief and my opinion based on years of experience, is that the team should pick the captain, not necessarily the coach. However, I wonder, does the coach weigh in though, because the coach has more experience? If they identify values and they're trying to pick somebody based on the values of the team,
Hmm.
um, or does the coach pick the captain? I personally, in my experience, I don't think the coach should solely, but maybe there's an argument for or against that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah,
want
go
to
ahead, Paul.
jump in a second. First off, you mentioned earlier about Michael Jordan and his leadership. The book Captain Class by Sam Walker. If you want to talk about captains, that's the book to read. And the author argues that Bill Cartwright was the leader, and goes through 7 other athletes in different sports and who the leader of that actual team, not being the best player.
Yeah.
And again, for me, it comes down to servant leadership and someone that can speak truth to their peers. And for me, I think the players need to have input, but if you give them sole input, they will pick on seniority.
Mhm.
And that
It'll be a popular vote.
rarely is the most impactful
Yeah.
leadership group, is your seniority group.
But
Because
it has
a lot of times I've waited my turn and now I have mine, and I will dictate instead of relationally speak truth to the team.
Well, I know that trust is a very, very big thing when it comes to team cohesion and leadership. If they don't trust the person, then they can't lead. And how do you establish trust? Well, again, just from years of experience, trust is established by follow through. It's by establishing doing things that you say you're going to do. And I know that teams can't always pick the greatest leader. So I guess my point is, it has to be a complete program effort.
Yeah, I would say that's probably accurate, and I think it's going to look different for all different. I mean, different ages. Like obviously with Mike, with little ones, it's about getting them a chance to lead, right? Like, hey, look, we want you to get a chance to be in front and kind of help people. We want you to go first. You be the demo person, kind of show them how to do things like that, and
Mhm.
and that just opens up this idea that, hey, look, like just because you're not as gifted or look as talented as this player over here, you're still getting a chance to lead, and people can still follow, and I can still follow people who maybe don't look as well as or good as I do. So you're communicating norms, right? Like it's okay to be different and that kind of stuff. So I think that's good. But I saw a couple other people kind of with ideas. So I think Mike, you're unmuted now. You want to share something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, so for the little ones, we've kind of treated it as a little bit of a rotation, so everybody gets some experience and everybody handles it a little bit differently, even at 7 years old. So, but I've also been part of teams in my past where when it was solely left up to the players, it became a popular vote or who everyone thought was the best player. And looking back now, I mean, it was very clear that some of those folks were not leaders at all. They were there strictly for those reasons. And, as a player, if you're not the captain or just a player as a young kid in general, you might just be a little bit afraid to speak up for whatever reason and say, hey, I disagree with this. And so looking at it from both perspectives now, it's easy to see both sides.
Mm-hmm. Totally. John?
Yeah, I think this is all great stuff. I love it. So I'm like nodding along and smiling because, like, you're talking about the little ones, and I spent so many years coaching the young kids, and it's so much fun. And yeah, I think you're spot on with that. You got to give the kids a chance, and there are so many coaches who don't do that at the young age. So I love to hear that. But as John, you were introducing this, and Ryan, as you chimed in, I can't help but kind of linger around like two words, and one is balance. I think more so recently for us specifically, like yes, we have team captains and the players did vote on that, but I collect the votes and I tally them, and Michelle and I look over it and we say, okay, where are we at with this? Do we agree? Do we not agree? Do we think there's somebody else that didn't get votes that we feel should be on the list? And so we talk about it behind closed doors, obviously, and but we have captains, and then we've also tried out a new thing this year, more so recently, where we have a leadership council. So every class has nominated one person to represent their class. We meet every 2 weeks roughly. And we're trying to, this is uncharted territory for us, using that phrase again now, but we're trying to help them get an opportunity to practice their leadership skills. And so we spent the first couple meetings just trying to figure out where they felt they were strong and where they felt they were weak as leaders. And then we try to build on that as we go on. And it's been really productive, I think. It's been fun. It's been interactive. And I think we're starting to see the players establish more of a voice for themselves. But perception is the other word. And that I think of Ryan, you were commenting about, taking the players' input. Yeah, take the players' input as a coach, but they're never going to see the tallies of the votes. They don't need to know necessarily who the popular vote was.
I was laughing when you were saying that because I distinctly remember us tallying the votes together and us both adding like 3 or 4 to a player who clearly was the best leader on the team, but was losing by a few. And I mean, Paul and Ryan both touched on it too. Like, there's some players that you just know are going to succeed in that role, and for whatever reason, the players don't see it. So I was just chuckling in my head, like, preach, like you have to step in at some point.
Yeah, well, giving them the perception of feeling like they had a voice. I don't think that's wrong, in my opinion. It sounds manipulative, but we're gonna take into account what they say. But ultimately, I think because we're more experienced and because we've dealt with it for so long at different levels, I think we can pat ourselves on the back and feel confident in saying, I don't agree with this one.
Yeah. So. I think when Mike was a player on my team, I got it wrong. I usually got it wrong. I was a young coach, and I learned from his group and probably even from John's group. I got it wrong probably with them too. But the one thing I learned after all these years is something that Paul touched on is your captain's got to be a servant leader. He or she has to be somebody that, and it's hard for kids, for college kids, high school kids, even and definitely young kids, putting others before themselves. And if you can't find somebody like that, then you got to keep looking, because it's a tough role to be in. So.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, what I'm seeing is like, if you know what works best for your group and you know your group,
Yeah.
you'll be able to figure out how to manipulate, if you need to, what should be apparent. And if you can't, then it's figuring out ways to help them excel and to really put them in places where you can say, hey, look, I think this is a characteristic we need, especially if a kid can grind it. Like if a kid can really, stick it out there and say like they tough it out, and you're looking for that kind of quality in your team. And you're looking for people to have an example of someone who is leads by example, doesn't speak by example or whatever, or speak up a lot. Then I think it's important for you to know what you're looking for and have a good system to draw that out.
Well, John, you touched on it too when we were speaking. You and I were speaking about values.
Yeah.
If your team has certain values, if your team lives and dies by certain values, which they should to some extent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then those captains should embody those values.
Yeah, and I think I work with people who are thinking through values and their system philosophy and all that stuff. So if you have clarity on that and your players know that, then there shouldn't be any reason why you can't say, hey, look, here's what we believe in this system. Here's what our program's all about. So we're looking for these qualities in our leaders. And that makes it pretty cut and dry for you on your end. And then the players have to either show it or they have to like start to learn it. And then you can just kind of set the standard from that point. So I do want to be mindful of our time and move forward here, but we can always come back to this conversation here in a little bit. So that's social cohesion. I'm glad it got a good chat out of us, because I think it's good to share these things and keep exploring these ideas. So next is task cohesion. And when we're looking at task cohesion, what we're talking about now is actually doing things that are working towards a goal. So most coaches and athletes prefer to like each other, but at the end of the day, as long as they're focused on what their common task is and they share the same goal and belief, that's more likely to lead to the outcome you're looking for than it is likely to focus on that social cohesion. So the idea is the task becomes the focus. Everybody directs their attention towards what you're trying to accomplish. There's compromise, there's sacrifice, there's communication, there's dedication. You're getting the buy-in because you have this shared vision. And so how do we do that? Well, here's a couple of things to make your, let's just call it team building activities. So if you're looking to make your team building activities less social focused and more task focused, here are a couple of things you can do. Number one, have a shared vision or goal. Okay, so try to explain to them what the shared vision is and help them understand how it's going to help them, or how it's going to work, or what you're looking to achieve and why that's important for them. Then try to figure out a way to build in some accountability. So can you have some sort of hierarchy built in there, not to sit there and say that you're doing something right or wrong, but to say, hey, look, for this task, this is going to be your leader. You are working to help them do their task. They're going to be delegating, because leaders need to delegate responsibilities and roles and things like that. You need to have somebody in charge. Help them depend on each other. So build some interdependency. That way, no one's really leaning on anybody, or sorry, taking the lead on their own. You're kind of forcing them to have to rely on other people and other people in the group. Communication is going to be really important because obviously you can't really do well unless you're communicating in some form of another. So having a really strong communication style, or even maybe focusing on communicating for the actual task, like that, you can have a shared goal or a task that you want to accomplish, but really focusing on the communication aspect of it can be one thing how you can really build into this stuff. And then accomplishment is about like having certain ways you can measure success, and then being able to celebrate that a little bit, noticing that you have made progress, and just making sure that you're not losing sight of what you're trying to achieve. So these are a couple things, if you jump onto the resources that are listed out, that you can actually bring into some of the tasks that you do, or you could bring into your teams to make it more task cohesive. And the funny thing is, if you've been part of teams that have been in difficult situations or they've had challenging tasks put in front of them, it's almost like the more challenging the task, the tighter the group gets. So you actually get this social cohesion through the difficulty of the task. And actually, I want to show you one activity that Rahul and I did. So here's one idea that you could do. And so I'll show you the picture. I'll run you through the example. I'll let Rahul talk about it a little bit, and then we'll go back together. So now this is what we call bull ring. And each of those strings is about 8 to 10 feet long. And it's connected to a little ring in the middle that's just big enough for a tennis ball to sit on. And in the middle is a cone, as you can see, where the top is cut off so the ball could sit on top of the cone and balance on there. And the idea is you tie, I believe it's 8 strings around, but you double loop it. And so when you pull it through, you're looping the string on the end of the ring and pulling it out, and there's 2 ends. So you have 8 strings, but you have 16 possible strings for people to hold. And if you notice here, we have 2 groups intertwined together. So you've got a team with red string and blue string. And the cool thing about this activity is how dynamic it can get. You can have it with a group of 5 people, 4 people, because you have to account for having the strings all in hand. And the idea basically is the tennis ball it starts somewhere off the cone, but you have to pick it up and move it, and then essentially set it down and have it balance on the cone, and then let the strings down on the ground and the ring rest on the cone without the ball falling off. And if you do that, that's 1 successful iteration. And now if you notice, we have so many people around. You got Rahul over here keeping a watchful eye. But the idea, again, is to get this group of people to have to work together for a common goal. And so when we think about the shared vision, accountability, interdependency, communication, having like a way to measure accomplishment, it's all built into this activity right here. It's a pretty task cohesive activity here to build team. And you can really focus on aspects of communication and things like that. So again, using the strings to lift up the ball sits on a ring, and trying to set it on top of that cone. That was basically the task, and it seemed simple, but it was really quite challenging. And I'll pause here and I'll let Rahul chime in. And Rahul, feel free to share whatever your thoughts and experiences were with it.
Sure. So just a couple things just to build off of what John was saying. I think this was by far one of the more creative activities I think that all of us had sort of in like our deck of things that we could do just with any sort of unit, whether it was some kind of team building, whether it was some kind of communication exercise. There's a lot of flexibility with this. So some of the different variations that we did. So obviously this is 2 different groups. We ended up, originally it was just, 8 to 16 people per kind of bull ring. And then we ended up just combining several different groups with their bull rings and just sort of like, making things difficult for both of them. So for example, these 2 groups, one group had to get to the other cones. So they had to kind of negotiate the strings of another group, the people of another group, the other group's tennis ball, their own cone, and try and get there first before the other group was. So you can introduce a lot of different elements with this. And I think this was a huge appeal for us because it's very easy to just kind of make things up on the fly. So we would have rules where, if you were holding a certain colored string, each bull ring was comprised of 2 different colors. So if you were, let's say, holding a red string, you had to have your eyes closed. So the green group is now responsible for moving the other group. You couldn't put your hand on anybody's shoulder because you were holding a string at the same time. We would do things like, if you were the youngest person in the group, it was your turn to take charge. So you could just sort of see, in case everybody was around, like, same age or whatever, we did was, whoever was newest to their particular unit, or, if it was a group of different ranks of people, whoever was, the most junior in rank, whoever was the most senior in rank. So it was a good way just to kind of make people step up and just sort of see what they were capable of and what they were doing. And I think the biggest takeaway that a lot of people had was, it seems like a pretty simple activity, but even just getting the ball off the cone was extraordinarily difficult, like beyond difficult for some people, because some people would just kind of yank their string and the ball would just sort of shoot off. You had to take those steps. You'd see some people being very slow and methodical about picking up their string. You'd see a lot of people very quick to blame other people, like, hey, you're too taut, like, you got to loosen up, whatever it was. Like, there was a lot of different observations that you could sort of see with that, and just kind of generally see people's leadership styles, communication styles just come across with it. So it's definitely one that we missed. It was definitely one that a lot of them just ended up talking about with us. And this was a good solid 3.5 years ago that we did this activity. I think it was like late 2017, I want to say, but it was one that we talked about for a good couple months after that and took a lot of feedback from, just because people brought up different iterations, and it was one that we were doing just with a lot of units afterwards. So it was a lot of fun. It was a really good time for sure.
Yeah, and I think I'm not sure if Rahul had the same experience, but when you would work with the groups, it was amazing how something so simple could help them like really kind of come together and have that social cohesion. Like they get done like, man, that was fun. Like I didn't think that could be as fun as that was, but that was a really interesting and fun activity. And it felt like you had the takeaways that you were looking for, whether it be the communication would be important, or that you needed to rely on other people and communicate well to them. You know, that you need to be able to get everybody on board to compromise what the solution is going to be, because sometimes we would tie them up and have them say, you have to get this untied and then get the strings all sorted out. You have to figure out how you're going to get this ball and this string and this ring, you know, all to work to get that ball and that cone over here. And it became a problem solving thing. So you can do so many iterations with it. But the cool thing about it was that it really forced the group to have to work together, because obviously if they didn't, they weren't successful with the task. It was less about making them feel good about each other, having them, you know, have good dynamics between themselves and socially get along. It's more about giving them a common task for them to have to work towards, and then letting the task be the way they come together and want to work together. Sean, I see you have your mic unmuted there.
Yeah. I was just curious, based on the setup of this, because I'm looking at it and I'm trying to wrap my brain around. So, and maybe I missed this in the tidbit as you guys were explaining. How do you avoid the one team interfering with the other?
Yeah,
or these
that's a good question. It's part of the whole thing.
like
They
the
have to figure it
strings
out.
look like they all overlap, but yet like they're
Yeah.
competing against each other, right?
Yeah. Well, in this case, they were competing with each other because they were trying to get those two cones there together. They're trying to get the balls to be set down at the same time, but being intermingled
Okay.
with each other.
That's
So if
what
you
I
look
missed.
over to the right side of the picture, I don't have my, there it is. This cone over here, this
Mhm.
group moved that from over here to this cone. And then,
Oh, wow. Okay.
and so then this group over here moved from a cone that's over here to this part. So they actually moved together, and they had to intertwine and coordinate and communicate between the two teams to help them be successful with this.
How on that's amazing.
Yeah. And it's
Wow.
something as simple as, you know, just getting some string, a ball, a cone, and a ring, and saying, all right, we're gonna build it. It's really easy to build, to be honest. You can make them real easily. I'm sure if you looked online, we could find it. And if I can find the link for it, I'll communicate it to you guys in the email.
Yeah, I mean, no, the structure and setup, I get it now. I'm more baffled at now at like once they came together, how did they cross strings
How
without
long
dropping the
did it
ball?
take?
Some
I would
groups just
say
crushed it. Like it was, yeah, some groups would pick it up super quickly. Like it's,
Yeah.
you just kind of have to get everybody in sync to be able to do it. And once you do it, there's actually really is like, you can do it pretty quickly. Like the ball doesn't really bounce. There'd be a couple times where people would pick it up too fast. The ball would bounce up and then land back on the ring and stuff like that. Like you could see everybody's heart just stop, you know, for a moment. Things like that would happen. But I think, yeah, it's really actually a really quick activity. I mean, even if you have just like 15, 20 minutes with a group, you know, even 10 or 15, you can do a lot of these simple variations. I mean, when you start slow, just kind of like crawl, walk, run. Initially it would just be, you know, pick the ball up, put it back down, pick the ball up, everybody just, you know, walk in a circle, you know, pass your strings, stuff like that. There's a lot of variations that you could come up with extremely quickly with this. And I think that was probably the most fun part, because we had a huge list of variations, and then some groups went through all of them. We just started making shit up because we kind of ran out of things to do with them. But it was hilarious in a way because like they really enjoyed it, and it's pretty easy just to kind of come up with variations and stuff that was happening. So it was a good time.
Yeah. You know, so again, just wanted to offer you guys something that may be useful for you. I know, Paul, you got a pretty big squad over there. You could easily make two groups and you know, have them have to work together like what we did here with two separate cones. Like you have one from this group over here to come to this cone here, but then you could have them have to work together to get between each other and go to the other side, have to walk around or go over and under each other. You can kind of come up with it the way that you want, but
I
again,
dare Mike to do it with 7-year-olds.
there you go. Mike, this is your task now. You've been challenged. So by all means, give it a shot. Make sure you YouTube it for us.
That would absolutely be interesting. And I'll tell you what, maybe we'll give it a shot.
No worries. But anyways, I do want to give you guys a chance just briefly. So I want to pause it here. Stop sharing my screen. Can if you want, if you guys have anything you want to share, any ideas, by all means use the time. I know we're getting close to the end of here, but if you want to stay and chat a little bit or share something you're experienced with, by all means, let us know.
You want like specifically like leadership building, like activities like that? Is that what you're
Well,
getting at?
or just maybe some things that you're currently doing to do some team building stuff that might give people some ideas. Like, it doesn't have to be as specific as what we just did, but maybe just kind of like
Yeah.
ways in which you're trying to help, your team build some cohesion and what like that.
I mean, I'll throw out there. I don't even know who. Someone in a previous one of these conversations may have suggested it to me, but Michelle and I have both read the book now. But is it Tony DeChico's, I think, book that Catch Them Being Good? Is that the title, Michelle? Am I right? That's got loads of I think like the end of every chapter almost has like an activity that you can do, and most of them are really, really simple. But they do require a non-COVID era setup because you're going to be in close contact with each other, right? So you could be clever and probably manipulate them a little bit and change them. But I know we have an extensive database put together of stuff that we pulled from that book. And John, I've used your the shoestring game.
Oh yeah,
You're hooked together. I love that one because I love watching the players get frustrated with each other and trying to figure it out. And then you show them the solution and they're like, are you serious? That's it. Meanwhile, they're like pretzels trying to figure out how to separate themselves. That's a fun one. We do that with camps, with the current team as well, just to do some little like, it's a little bit of preseason team bonding type.
Nice.
And you figure out who's got tempers and who doesn't.
Nice. Sean, real quick, do you mind if I share what we had talked about in our the scavenger hunt?
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. I have it all written down. If you want to share it.
Sean and I had talked about ways in which he could kind of develop some culture and fun and things for his program down at Marietta. And one of the ideas we came up with was a scavenger hunt, making it so that the players had to go around town in Marietta and find like specific things. But the thing is cool about it is that the players had to pick the items that they wanted their teammates to find. So if like Rahul and I were partnered up, we would find a specific location and then have that be our place, and then we'd have to give a clue or write out our clue for what our location was and give it to Sean so they can compile all the lists of everybody's own individual location. And then Sean would turn it loose to the group, and whoever found all locations correctly would be, or all the locations the fastest would be the first team done. But ideally, you're having them to work together to kind of run around town and find certain spots that are unique to either Marietta or the city itself and all that. So just trying to figure out ways to be even non-sport related, just kind of get them working together and talking, communicating, things like that, get them interested, having fun, that kind of stuff too. So yeah. Anyone else have anything that they're doing?
One thing that I've done in the past on road trips is we do bigger and better, where you start with a small object, and usually on a college campus, and you trade. They send them out and they trade these objects, and then they come back, and whoever has the best object at the end. I had a guys team. We were out in Boulder, and they started with 2 Andes mints from Olive Garden, and this one team brought back a cheerleading outfit, and another team brought back this enormous dorm chair. And then they talk about their story of, we traded this for a brick, and this brick we trade, just going through, and they have a great story to tell. And now when we still get together, they talk more about bigger and better than they do any of the games we played. So
nice, cool. That's cool. I like that idea. It's kind of like that show that used to be on about like Craigslisting, where you get like a paper clip and you try to trade up to a car or whatever it is, and that's cool. I like that. Nice. Anyone else? Okay. Well, just wrapping up real quick. Let me just jump on here again. I gotta share my screen. All right. So a couple of things that I want you guys to walk away with. I would be remiss if I didn't bring in some work or some ideas from Adam Grant, who I think is probably one of the premier organizational psychologists in the country right now. He has the podcast Work Life, which is sponsored by TED, and he's over at UPenn. And he's just kind of the guy who's just trying to make work suck a little less, essentially, is what his kind of tagline is. But if you look here, his comments, in teams, it appears that shared experience matters more than individual experience. The best groups aren't necessarily the ones with the most stars, but rather the teams that have collaborated in the past. And so when I think about that, I think a lot about trying to get players and people that would probably be sharing roles to do a lot of work together, because collaborating, having to work together, being familiar with each other, that's probably going to help you in a team sport. So if you have your right back and your center backs working together, you have your midfielders working together, you have your wing players working together, whatever it is, just kind of giving them more reps to do things together, and not just because like on a team playing a game, it's going to be beneficial for you, but also just in terms of having the group be familiar with everybody and how they do stuff, and really trying to make sure that everybody knows who does what and how they can do it. And then you can start switching it up, so that way that not everybody has role specific stuff, but they are good at their roles when it's time for them to be good at their roles. So you're giving a chance to experience everything. Got to throw a center back up front last 4 minutes of the game, whatever it's going to be. They've been there, they've tried it. They're not new in that moment. They have some familiarity with it, that kind of stuff. Highest quality and on-time delivery rates were achieved not by the teams whose members had the most individual experience, but by the teams whose members had the most shared working experience together. So again, advocating for making sure you're trying to get as much shared work experience as you can with your players, getting them opportunities to work together in different situations, whether it be sport or outside of sport. So when I think about that, my takeaways essentially are these three. Chemistry is a verb, or cohesion is a verb in this case. It's not a thing. It's a verb. You have to do it. It's an action. You need to get people doing things and doing things often. So that's why the second one is get reps in. Just because, well, I think usually the common conception or idea is to do team building at the beginning of the season. Well, yeah, but a team isn't just a team in a season. They're also in the off season, in the preseason. They're also a team in the middle of the season, at the end of the season, in the tournament. So perhaps, sometimes can you build in some team building activities throughout the course of the year, but also throughout the course of the season, and not just focusing on just at the beginning of the year or the beginning of the season. And lastly, I think Scott, myself, Rahul, anybody who does any kind of teaching, Ryan as well, you need to have some sort of debrief when you're working with your athletes. You have to have learning points that are being pointed out. You can't assume that just because you run a session and the session was about communication, that they understand the takeaways, right? You have to be direct and deliberate about what your intentions are. So, having a good, effective debrief is going to be really important for you to really make sure you're hammering home on these things. Even if it's so much as, hey, look, today we're just focusing on getting you guys working together. We want you to work together. We want you to have some interdependence with each other. We want you to feel comfortable communicating with each other, pointing out those things more so than just, hey, we're going to do this, let's do it. Because you want to communicate what your takeaways are, what your learning points are, because that way at the end, you can go back and say, okay, so that session was about blank, but what were some of the takeaways you got from that? What did you learn from this? Where can we improve? How effective was our communication in this case? But you're just essentially trying to make sure that you are not just leaving things to chance. You're trying to be really deliberate about your session there. Okay, sorry, my chat popped up. All right, so I'm going to, I think that's it. Let's see here. Yeah, that's it. So I'm going to stop there. Scott has a good point. He brought up the well better how, which is a pretty simple, effective debrief of like what did we do well, or what was done well in our activity. What could be better, and then how can we be better, or how can we do it better? So Scott, thank you for that. I mean, if you want to contribute anything else to that, Scott, I don't want to take it away from you.
Nope, you nailed it.
Okay. But yeah, essentially that's it for tonight. You know, if you guys have questions, feel free to throw them out there. I'm happy to try and answer any, or even let some of the other people. And Sean, totally. I'll end up sending out these the slides, and I'll pull off that graphic individually and attach it on there. That way,
Yeah,
it's
either
not.
way, don't go out of your way to do extra work. I like
Oh.
stuff like that. It's kind of a nice little like mind mapping type thing. So it kind of gives
I
us
mean, it's cool. It's just pulling it off really, and then just putting it as a separate attachment. So it's not that too big of a deal. But yeah, so you know, again, the takeaways for me is trying to get as many reps as you can within reason. You're not trying to overplay this idea of team cohesion, but you're trying to address it and be really deliberate about saying, hey, we're looking to build some cohesion here. We want to do some task stuff. We want to make sure that we're achieving things. We don't want to just leave it to like, hey, let's be social. Let's make each other like each other. You know, we're really not necessarily. If we could focus on that, the message gets sent that, you know, getting along together is more important than we're actually here for. And then that may indirectly reinforce those cliques and things that we're trying to avoid that might be counterproductive to us as coaches and sport professionals. So I'm seeing no questions at all. All right, so I will try to get the bull ring instructions somewhere. I'm sure they're out there. I will again pull off that graphic and put it in the notes. I'll get the slides copied for you guys like normal, send them off to you, and we'll be ready to attack it again in February. I don't think I have everybody's responses for the Google form for the open forum, but I did get a couple in. So what I'll do is probably when I send these notes out is I'll pull off the top choices, and that can be when we narrow down what we want to focus on for March. Maybe March.
Sean, do you have a date in mind for February? Not to rush.
It's on the sheet that I sent out, I believe.
Okay, I'll check that.
Just looking at it, I tried to make it at the middle of the month, so it's probably on the 17th, my guess.
I'll double
Actually,
check that.
yeah, it is.
Overlook
I got it down right here. It's the 17th,
that.
and
Thank you.
I believe that one's on for leadership.
Perfect.
So we'll be looking at Ryan Creech for that one. I don't even know if he's still there anymore.
Hopefully something different.
Yeah, I'm here. I said, oh boy, but I forgot to turn my microphone on.
Well, we'll definitely look to have Ryan leverage some of his knowledge, because Ryan's been actually doing the Leadership Academy or he was doing Leadership Academy at Northview for like last 10 years. Was it, Ryan?
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I'm sure
Stepped away this year to try to let younger people take over.
Yeah, that's
So,
nice. Very,
yeah.
very leadership of you.
Well, yeah.
That's good, Ryan. All right. Well, if nothing else, you guys have a good month, really, and hopefully you guys are getting a chance to take care of yourselves, getting out and doing some stuff to avoid being stuck from COVID and whatnot. So again, love seeing you guys here. Hope you guys got something out of it, and we'll be in touch.
All right.
Thanks, John. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
John.